Well, howdy, y'all. Welcome to Once Upon a Time in Texas, episode number 82. I'm your host, Michael Mitchell. Couple of fun things, just some random stuff. So I've told y'all that my two oldest kids go to school out at one of the new high schools, and it's a beautiful school, man. I got to tell you, we really did a hell of a job on our schools. That's a real feather in the cap for the two brand new high schools that we've got. Feather in the cap of Wichita Falls. If you guys are in Wichita Falls and you're hearing from me right now, you need to take an opportunity to go out and check out the new schools whenever they have the opportunity for you. But homecoming is this week, which kind of stinks because that's also Pioneer Reunion out in Henrietta, Texas, Clay County, where I grew up. So my girls are kind of on their own. They're having the homecoming football game Friday night, and then Saturday night they're doing the big homecoming dance shindig, whatever the heck they're calling it. So they're going to miss the big rodeo Pioneer Reunion out in Henrietta, which we never miss. My oldest daughter turns 17 on the 19th, and Pioneer Reunion is always right around her birthday. So up until she was about 9 years old, she always thought that the Pioneer Reunion parades and everything were for her. And we just let her believe that. And so she's always had a good time with that. And I cannot believe that I'm about to have a 17-year-old. But anyway, they had a parade the other night out around the school, and there's no neighborhood around the school either. Well, at least Memorial, which is the one on the west end of town. There's some neighborhoods in a proximity, but I mean, pretty much it's like an open pasture with the school in it. Legacy, which is the one over on the east side of town, is pretty similar, but there are some neighborhoods right there a lot closer. And so before, all of our schools were neighborhood schools, right in the big fat middle of a neighborhood. And so whenever they do these parades, there were always people, around at their houses and stuff like that. So my wife told me this one was a little different because they've just got this big giant loop of parking lots around the school. And so they just got in a parade and went around the school. So she said it was cool, but, she said it wasn't quite the same feel. So I get it, but I mean, lots of cool stuff. If you've got the opportunity to go tour the new schools and you're here in Wichita Falls, I mean, my gosh, go do it. It is so cool. And both of the schools are exactly the same, except for like the colors of the bricks. That's pretty much the difference. And then, of course, their school colors and mascots and stuff. But yeah, I mean, as far as the buildings and the structures go, pretty much the same, which is kind of a neat deal. My son, Raylan, he's in 7th grade, and he made it onto the tennis team. And, he struggles with athletic ability because I'm not the most athletic person on the planet, and neither is my wife, and so he comes by it naturally. But he tried out, and he made the tennis team. Now, that being said, he is the lowest ranked on the tennis team currently, but he did beat out some other kids to be on the team. So it's kind of like, well, as far as the team goes, you're dead last, but, you did beat out some other kids to be on the team. So it's like, hey, it doesn't matter. We're super proud of him. He's giving it a shot. It's not sitting around playing on stinking video games all the time. But he went out and he had his first tennis match yesterday. And although he's only really been playing for about a week and a half, he's only had maybe half a dozen practices. He went out, he ended up losing both matches that he was in. He was in a singles match and a doubles match. But you know what? He went out, he gave it a shot, he had fun, and he tried. And that's, how it starts. I didn't expect him to be some famous tennis player just as soon as he grabbed a racket. And the fact that he came off the court not upset at being, at losing was kind of refreshing. And I was pretty proud of him. And so That's a good thing. Of course, Pioneer Reunion's coming up. I did go to a city council meeting this morning. Our city Parks and Rec department is working on a new 10-year plan. It's super cool. They've actually got a validated and verified survey back where they randomly surveyed quite a few people here in the city. I was included. So out of 104,000 people, I was one of the people that was randomly selected to do the survey. And so I did the survey, and they got enough responses back to move forward, which is really cool. And so I did get to talk to the gentleman that was kind of over that effort this morning, and he wants me to start coming to some other meetings and getting involved there. So I'm going to do my best. So anyway, let's jump into this week. Have you heard of the Karankawa Native American tribe? Did you know there's a group in Texas that's trying to rebuild the tribe and its language and kind of some of its native lands? I'll tell you, I did not. And we'll get to that here in a second. Before we jump into the Karankawa tribe here in Texas, I'd like to thank our sponsors. As always, that's me and Victory Home Loans. I know there are tons of people moving to and in Texas and Oklahoma, and I'm licensed in both. I am an independent mortgage loan originator, and for those of y'all that don't know what that is, that means I help people buy homes. I am not a bank or credit union. I'm an independent, so much like you would go to an independent insurance broker who kind of do the shopping for you to find the best deal, I do the same thing except with mortgage lenders when you're looking to buy a home. So we, across the country as mortgage lenders, tend to save our people over $10,000 when they're doing their loan, and just a better deal overall. So if you know someone moving to or in Texas or Oklahoma, send them my way. Send them over to themichaelmitchell.com, THE-michaelmitchell.com. And we work hard to make that process faster, cheaper, and easier. So send them on over my way. Let them work with the Michael Mitchell at Victory Home Loans. I love to help people get into houses of their own. So where did this week's idea come from? Well, I saw Texas Monthly magazine, and if you guys aren't getting Texas Monthly, you're crazy. It's a great magazine, and I saw this magazine a week or two ago. It's the September edition, and there was a story about the Lost Tribe, which is the Karankawa Tribe, and Karankawa is K-A-R-A-N-K-A-W-A, and it was the Karankawa Tribe here in Texas. And so I went to the Texas Monthly website. I read the majority of the article, and it's really interesting. The things they're trying to do and kind of where their villages were, kind of their land that they covered. So we're going to cover some of that. So I encourage you to go check out Texas Monthly and check out the story on the lost Karankawa tribe of Texas and kind of how it's coming back. So first off, most of the information that I'm reading to you today came straight from that tribe's website, which is Karankawas with an S.com. And this thing was just chock full of information. Whoever's kind of developed that website really did a pretty good job answering a lot of questions. So first off, who are the Karankawas? Well, their people were a Gulf Coast cultural group or tribe. Prior to European contact, the Karankawas likely numbered more than 8,000, so it wasn't a huge tribe or cultural group, but still pretty good. They really thrived being down on the coast, and then after European contact, the Karankawas remained in control of their coastal bend territories and advantageously played would-be colonizers off of each other. And then foiled by these natives, Europeans depicted the Karankawas as the most savage people in Texas, which is a myth that still persists to this day. So over time, the Karankawas population dwindled from, appropriation, disease, displacement, warfare, as happened a lot. In the middle of the 19th century, after being forcibly removed from their homelands, the Karankawas were either compelled to integrate into Mexican or Anglo-American society or tracked down and killed, which again, unfortunately, happened a lot. Even so, surviving Karankawas retained and passed down aspects and stories of their culture from generation to generation. So in the 21st century, the Karankawa Kadla, Kadla, I'm probably saying that wrong, which basically kind of means mixed Karankawas, formed to gather and organize individuals who identified as basically partially Karankawa. So the Karankawa Kadla has since revitalized the Karankawa language, which we'll get to later, and the language was actually called, you guessed it, Karankawan. They worked with local authorities to protect burial sites and develop educational programs that combat, some of the incorrect Anglo education. And, yeah. So, what about where they lived and where they live today? Well, it's important to note that there were several tribes inhabiting Texas in the 1700s, which is kind of when this goes back to mostly. Mainly, it's a lot of tribes and cultural groups that we already know. Comanches, Wichitas, Caddos, Tonkawas, and Lipan and Mescalero Apaches, to name just a few. There were several other tribes that were in Texas, and I couldn't name them all. So generally, the Karankawas lived on land between the Corpus Christi Bay and Galveston Bay. So if you think way down on the Gulf of Mexico, you're thinking kind of further down to the southwest and then up towards the northeast, kind of going towards Houston. So they had this kind of big chunk of land right there. And it's important to note that the Karankawas territory shifted really depending on the time period. So with the first contact with Europeans in 1528, for instance, these people's northern range was likely just kind of near the edges of Galveston Bay. But throughout the next 100 years, throughout the next 100 years, the Karankawas seem to have incorporated the Akokisa peoples. I'm probably saying that wrong, and if you know what I'm saying, I'm sorry. Akokisa. They brought them into their culture at the beginning of the 1800s. They resided around Galveston proper, where they found the notorious pirate Jean Lafitte trespassing on their land. Today, Karankawas live throughout Texas and cities such as Alamo, Corpus Christi, Dallas, Donna, Houston, and Galveston, and even as far west as California. So we can sketch the Karankawas' traditional territory with relative accuracy because of the unique Rockport pottery they produced. Throughout Texas, they were one of the only tribal groups that regularly decorated their ceramics with asphaltum, naturally occurring tar. With that in mind, archaeologists can determine the Karankawas' tribal boundaries by pinpointing the furthermost extent of this Rockport ware. So, a guy named Robert Rickless, an accomplished archaeologist, determined the inland boundary of the Karankawas as being 25 miles from the coast. Beyond that point, excavations uncovered pottery without asphaltum and pottery without fine sandy coastal paste. These other ceramics, which heavily utilize crushed bone tempering, belong to inland groups, such as the Aranamas and the Tonkawas. Gail Fritz, in her survey around the Colorado River and East Matagorda Bay, saw pottery attributed to groups like the Akokisas, Goose Creek, and San Jacinto ceramics, which determined the northern boundary of the Karankawas around present-day Matagorda City. The work of Robert Malouf and associates placed the southern boundary of the Karankawas beneath the Baffin Bay, and there archaeologists could not locate any pottery shards from the Rockport phase. So it's kind of cool that they're basing a lot of this stuff off of pottery. All right. So by examining Anglo, Spanish, Mexican, and French sources, we see the Karankawas moving well beyond their archaeologically defined boundaries, which is kind of cool. For example, during the Karankawa Spanish War, the renowned chief Joseph Maria and his brother Mateo demonstrated a thorough understanding of the land south of Corpus Christi Bay when they led 55 warriors 200 miles along the seashore south to Camargo near present-day Reynosa, where they stole a large herd of horses and goats. And the Karankawa Tribe, which is usually placed around the mouths of the Brazos and Colorado rivers, is found in the historical record ranging as far inland as 150 miles. So with all this being said, it should be noted that the word Karankawas, or Karankawa, is really an umbrella term that refers to multiple groups that spoke the same or at least a similar language and shared a similar culture. So prior to the 1780s, these tribes really viewed themselves as autonomous entities. When the Spanish attempted genocide on the Karankawas in the late 18th century, various Karankawa Various Karankawa clans unified to fight a common enemy. After getting rid of the Spanish, these clans mostly returned to just kind of governing themselves independently. But there were kind of 5 major Karankawa clans during Texas's colonization. The Capanos, which resided near Corpus Christi and Capano Bay, the Coapites, who resided near San Antonio Bay, the Cujanes, who resided near Matagorda Bay, and the Karankawases, I'm probably saying that wrong, the most populous Karankawa group, and the culture's namesake resided also near Matagorda Bay, and the Cocos, who resided near the Colorado River and Galveston Bay. Today, the 2 largest Karankawa clans are the following. They have the Coyote clan, which is based out of Houston, Galveston area, and the Hawk clan, which is based out of Corpus Christi. So, opposite from other tribes mentioned, above, that were pretty nomadic, which a lot of tribes were, the Karankawas were semi-sedentary people. So in the spring and summer, they temporarily moved inland and hunted game and foraged for local flora. And in the winter months, they lived in large towns of upward of 500 individuals on the coast. This distinction of being semi-sedentary is significant because it acknowledges that the Karankawas actually had settlements. They did not wander to and fro, eating whatever passed in front of them. Instead, they repeatedly inhabited the same pieces of land. And so that's kind of a cool thing. But if you read the book 1491, it does talk a lot about how there were huge, when Europeans first hit America, huge villages all up and down the Mississippi and kind of everywhere they went. And then they died out later, presumably of disease and stuff like that. So, for them still being semi-sedentary later, later 1700s, 1800s, is kind of a rare thing, I think, for the most part. There is a place called McGloin's Bluff, which is situated on the northeastern side of Corpus Christi Bay. And it was a Karankawa town. It spanned around 5 football fields in length and was inhabited, as best they can tell, from the 1300s to the 1700s. And archaeologists have located over 40,000 artifacts. One of the earliest written accounts happened when conquistadors, errant sailors or French colonists, landed on Texas's coast. And as is usually the case, they had problems locating fresh water. So the Karankawas for centuries had passed down knowledge of where springs and seepages and nearby creeks could be found. And with knowledge of where to locate fresh water and abundantly stocked bays, the Karankawas really sustained large settlements. And it's a pretty cool thing, and that kind of lends to that semi-sedentary tribe. In 1720, the French captain Jean Beranger encountered another Karankawa settlement of similar size as the town at McGloin, sent by the governor of Louisiana to reconnoiter St. Bernard Bay, which is now Galveston, and in search of feasible French settlement site, Beringer accidentally sailed past his intended destination and entered Aransas Bay. Beringer stayed in the area for an unspecified amount of time to repair his ship, and as they were springing many leaks. While there, he encountered, as he put it, a large Karankawa market town built of hide huts that housed over 500 people. Later, the Karankawas took him to another village, which he described as a permanent village of about a dozen large, quite round huts where they kept most of their food for the winter. So during the Karankawa Spanish War, the Crown's troop attempted to exterminate the people of the coastal bend, but their environment kind of acted as an impenetrable barrier for Spain's, expeditions. The sun blistered the soldiers' skin as they aimlessly trudged around in the marshlands. The knife-like oysters lacerated their feet when they waded around the shallow lagoons. It says, wind swept away words and drained energy, and throughout their struggles, the troops saw smoke signals unfurling in the air because the Karankawas were tracking their progress. So, they lived in kind of this impenetrable fortress. So Spanish Sergeant Antonio Trevino was one of the first Europeans to reach the Karankawas' heartland through an overland path in December 1789. He achieved this feat with multiple Karankawa guides. When Trevino finally reached a settlement, he described having to walk across a very narrow entrance, nearly surrounded by ocean water. A year and a half later, 29 Karankawas and Antonio Trevino guided 2 Franciscan priests through the coastal people's territory. The barefoot Fray Manuel Julio de Silva, who wore a heavy chain vest at all times as a means of penance, wrote a detailed letter about his reconnaissance of the Karankawas coast. Silva described the Indians' intricate roadways and waterways, how each of their villages possessed nearly 100 individuals, of whom he laden with gifts of tobacco, grain, and corn biscuits, and the attractive lands that he believed were the best and most beautiful that the King of Spain could possess. So what's really interesting, though, is that they have pieced together some of the original language. And it stems pretty much mostly from the accounts of 8 people. And these people are Jean-Baptiste Talon in 1698. Talon lived among the Karankawas as a child in the late 17th century, and he provides the most reliable source on the Karankawan language. And an interpreter who interviewed Talon in Brest, France, listed actually 29 words. So then you've got Jean Beringer in 1729. He was the French captain who was associated with the Karankawas while repairing his ships in Aransas Bay. And he penned 100 words in his journal. Jean-Louis Berlandier and Raphael Chevelle. Berlandier was a young naturalist who encountered the Karankawas. This was 1828-29. While touring Texas with the Mexican Boundary Commission under General Manuel Mier y Terran, Raphael Chevelle also accompanied the Mexican Boundary Commission as a mineralogist. Berlandier and Chevelle jotted down about 158 words. At this point, Karankawa culture groups had intermixed with other native peoples in Texas, and so the language therefore had shifted a little bit. So even still, it's a great source for the language. Another person named Old Simon in 1884. Simon was a Tonkawa informant for the ethnographer Albert Samuel Gatschet. Simon knew pieces of the Karankawan language because he lived among some of them as a child. Gatschet believed Simon was around 75 years old and stated that it was a difficult matter to obtain any reliable information from him on account of an extreme debility of body and memory. Simon fuzzily remembered about 17 words. Next, also in 1884, Sally Washington served as another Tonkawa source on the Karankawan language. Washington lived with the Karankawa man as a younger woman. Getchit believes Sally was around 75 years old too, and she recollected about 6 words. Next, we bump to 1888. Alice W. Oliver. Her father settled in the Karankawas territory in 1838. And as a girl of around 10 years old, Alice met with the Karankawas, who seasonally visited their small farm. She learned some of the Karankawan words over the course of a decade, wrote them down, but lost her notebook. At the age of 60, she tried to remember as many Karankawan words as possible for the ethnographer Albert Getchit. She recollected about 137 words. Oliver is a problematic source, though. In her notes on the Karankawa Indians at the beginning of Getchit's report, which is based off her memory, there are a litany of factual errors. Oliver, for example, states that the Karankawas had 3,000 warriors during the Texas Rebellion, when in reality the number was likely around 100, maybe 2. Regardless, the Karankawan she remembered is a decent match with the sources. The last one is the late 1800s, early 1900s, a guy named Guy Bryan. Galveston physician Joseph Osterman Dyer interviewed Guy Bryan, who claimed to know 7 words. How Bryan learned these words is never really mentioned. The list is considered untrustworthy. Dyer is infamous for his misinformation. In one instance, he insisted that the Karankawas subsisted only off of roots, beetles, and the dung of deer. In another instance, he expounded that these peoples had a mucous membrane unaccustomed to spiced and hot dishes and therefore could not eat cold and raw fish. So that's interesting. There are some myths around these people, and they seem to have been started to kind of scare away people and to create a want to get rid of them as a cultural group, as, what happened with a lot of tribes. There is a myth that they were cannibals, and also that they were giants, being extremely tall. And really, both of these are myths. As far as giants go, the average man was about 5 feet 8 inches tall, which was tall compared to most Europeans in the 1700s. So maybe, but they weren't like 7 or 8 feet tall like they were portrayed sometimes. As for cannibalism, well, it's kind of true, kind of not. So they did practice some exo-cannibalism, which is basically cannibalism of their enemies, which was used pretty much kind of to dishonor their enemies, kind of like scalping in other tribes and portrayed widely in Western movies. So that is some of the history and myths surrounding the Karankawa people. So what about today? Well, they have a great website with a ton of information that can be found at karankawas.com, KARANKAWAS.com. Their website does say this about them, though, and I encourage you guys to go check out their website. It does say, today the Karankawa Kadla formed to gather and organize individuals who identified as being partially Karankawa. There are 2 clans, the Hawks of Corpus Christi and the Coyotes of Galveston Bay. The Karankawa Kadla has since revitalized the Karankawan language, worked with local authorities to protect burial sites, and developed education programs to combat traditional Anglo education. They have also continued to safeguard the Texas Gulf Coast, and they say many other things in there. So there you go, the Karankawas. What do y'all think? Let me know what other weird and off-the-wall interesting Texas history you'd like to hear. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, me and Victory Home Loans. If you know someone moving to or in Texas or Oklahoma, send them my way to themichaelmitchell.com, THEMichaelmitchell.com. And remember, I sell dreams, not mortgages. Thank you all for tuning in to Once Upon a Time in Texas. As always, remember, the stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. Y'all have a great week.